The first finalist we're going to hear from is Accelerated Learning Program.
Welcome to Ethiopia, where a powerful partnership is shaping the future of education for children at the margins. In a world where education often eludes those who need it most, where obstacles like poverty, conflict, and displacement create barriers for children's learning, the Luminos Fund and the Ethiopian Ministry of Education have united to rewrite this narrative. Our partnership stands as a powerful response to a global learning crisis. In sub-Saharan Africa, 98 million children are still excluded from education, while hundreds of millions of children around the world are not learning despite being in school. It is estimated that 262 million children will complete primary education without the ability to read a short story. The Accelerated Learning Program is stepping up to the challenge. Our journey began in 2017 when the Ethiopian government invited the Luminos Fund to pilot its catch-up education program in a small number of classrooms. The program teaches the most vulnerable out-of-school children to read, write, and do maths in just one school year and support their transition back into the school system to continue their education. Today, the Accelerated Learning Program has reached over 65,000 out-of-school children. 91% of students successfully completed the program. Our impact goes beyond just numbers. The Luminos Fund is collaborating with the Ministry of Education with the goal of strengthening the education system so it is more resilient to the shocks caused by COVID-19, climate change, and conflict. In the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia, for example, the Luminos Fund is supporting the government to refine the Accelerated Learning Program model to help children who have been out of school for more than 3 years due to conflict, internal displacement, and other education barriers. Our partnership thrives because of a shared vision and determination. We are committed to refining, scaling, and making quality education accessible to all children in Ethiopia. Together, the Luminos Fund and the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia are supporting children to not only catch up on missed years of education, but also prepare them for lifelong learning.
And representing the Accelerated Learning Program, we have Caitlin Barron. So now we turn it over to our judges.
I'm happy to jump in. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, first of all, for gathering this great group, and what an amazing video and amazing program. So to kick us off with the questions, I find it really, really great that you partnered directly with the Ministry of Education. Can you share some learnings from partnering with that government organization?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. I am here today on behalf of both the Ethiopian Ministry of Education and the Luminos Fund. And this is a partnership many years in the making, whose significance has never been more important. The Ethiopian government has made an extraordinary investment in making the reality of access to education possible for almost every Ethiopian child. And in the last 20 years, Ethiopia has literally quadrupled the size of its schooling system. That being said, there are still children, the most vulnerable children, the hardest to reach, who are left behind. And the government alone doesn't have the resources or capabilities or ability to focus on reaching that very last mile, sort of hardest to reach population. And that's where the partnership with the Luminos Fund and our community-based organization network comes in. We work together with the ministry to train government teachers to deliver a rich, intensive catch-up education program that helps children who've been kept out of school by conflict, poverty, or displacement to cover multiple years of learning in just 1 year, and then mainstream with children their own age. And I guess what we've learned along the way is, first and foremost, if you're going to have a successful public-private partnership, it pays to have a government partner who is as committed to the first principle mission as you are. And in that sense, you know, my colleagues and I at Luminos were really blessed to be able to work with the Ethiopian government. And it also pays to be working on an issue that has mind share. You know, so in Ethiopia, in one of my first meetings with the Ministry of Education there, I asked, like, gosh, for all the change in Ethiopia, all the ups and downs, all the political unrest, there's been consistently one of the highest levels of investment in education on the continent. And I asked this Ministry of Education official, like, what's behind that? And he put his fist down on the table firmly and said, Ethiopia will be a middle-income country in my lifetime, and education is the fuel that will get us there. And that passion runs through the Ethiopian people up and down the nation. And we at Luminos couldn't possibly do what we do without them.
Thanks for elaborating on that, and thanks for the excellent presentation and work you're doing. So as a program, it has reached out to 65,000 students, if I'm not wrong. What's your plan, and how do you see it growing further and scaling it up to cover, I guess, the numbers and the demand is much, much higher. So what are your plans for that, and how do you see the fund and the private sector contributing to that?
That's a wonderful question. And we are today at a really exciting inflection point for this program. So we, in partnership with the ministry, have reached 65,000 children to date. This school year, beginning now in September, the ministry, together with Luminos' support, will reach over 30,000 children. So you can see that we're really at that real sort of hockey stick point in the curve. And that comes on the back end of, honestly, years of investment in capacity building at both the national and the regional level. We've trained over 2,000 teachers in the government school system, and importantly, trained the ministry's training staff so that they can now carry that work forward. So much of our most important work going forward from here will be twofold. One, investing in distilling and documenting what works as this model is refined and iterated across the different regions in Ethiopia. Today, the model runs in 7 different languages. There are many more that need to be yet addressed, and lots of learnings to come along the way. And then secondly, the critical long-term role for Luminos is on data and evaluation and building the ministry's capability to understand which regions are thriving, which are struggling, and where do government resources most need to be directed.
Thanks for sharing that. I was sort of curious, as you talked about the refinements and iterations that you've been through, what are some of those refinements and iterations that you may, as Luminos Fund, might have gone in as thinking were the case at the start of the partnership and sort of evolved over time?
That's a great question. I would say first and foremost, the kind of work that we do is commonly referred to as accelerated learning, and this initiative in Ethiopia is the Accelerated Learning Program. And that's because we help children who've fallen behind to catch up. But the most important aspect of this work is not that it goes fast, but that it goes deep. And so investing in a really, really strong foundation of literacy and numeracy sets children up to first learn to read and then be able to read to learn. And what we find is actually going slow and deep in the beginning actually sets children up to advance their own learning at a greatly accelerated pace over the long run. So that's one key answer. I guess the other one is, this is probably true of every scaling process, and I'm sure my colleagues who are about to come out would say the same, but I think your implementing model only gets simpler as you scale it, right? So part of that scaling journey is figuring out actually which of these elements, which we may love and are dear to our hearts, but may not be mission critical, can we actually let go of as we scale the model, so that you're inevitably getting simpler and simpler and simpler, and really honing in on the sort of 5 to 10 core practices that really give you 80% of the impact.
Thank you, and congratulations. It's an amazing endeavor, what you're doing. I have two questions that are not related. The first one is, I mean, you've spent a lot of time and learning throughout these years on how to fine-tune the model, as you're saying, and you're now having like a more of a national scale. Is it a model that you see that can be applied eventually to other countries, other regions? Is the first question. And the second question is, do you see a difference between urban and rural application? And is that something that is interesting, or, because that also applies to the scalability? Thank you.
Those are two great questions. So on the replication front, we've actually already replicated the program in 3 other African countries. So absolutely. And I think the key there is that there's a critical 70% of practices that translate from country to country. In essence, we're always working on foundational literacy and numeracy. It might be a different language, it might be a different national context, but the pedagogy, the way you teach those things is the same. That said, there's a critical 30% which must be developed by the country itself. And there's nothing about education that sort of rolls out like a sort of uniform picnic blanket, right? There are core principles and practices that we can thoughtfully carry across different geographies, but education is inherently local, so we have to be both of those things. And you had another good question. Urban, rural. I honestly, the real focus of our program is actually on rural kids. And that's because in the vast majority of countries where children still miss out on school, it's really predominantly in rural areas. So a lot of our work is all about how can you be effective in an environment beyond the reach of electricity, beyond the reach of a cell phone signal, with a minimally trained government teacher? How can you really strip down a model, make use of the resources that are in situ, but be very grounded and realistic about sort of the modesty of the circumstance in which the classroom operates?
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for showcasing your fantastic partnership, and congratulations again.